This episode of the Citadel Cafe is brought to you by listeners like you. Visit patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe to find out how you can become a patron and help make this show possible. This is the Citadel Cafe, episode number 333 for Wednesday, September 11th, 2019. My name is Joel Duggan, and the Citadel Cafe is where my friends and I hang out to talk about the geeky stuff that we are into. Joining me this week, Mr. Lou Page is back. You can find him at Busy Zombie Lord on all the social media that matters, and of course, Zombies Ate My Podcast. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you for having me. I'm not awake yet. I'm not used to recording this early.
Yeah, we're not used to getting up and doing this at 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, I guess I am. I normally record with Megan first thing, but you have taken the day off, and
Yes.
so as a result, you were able to record a little bit early. And I have to say that I have been spoiled recording the Citadel Cafe mostly now during the daytime. I find podcasting in general, even streaming in general, I find I'm much better at it now during the day. Maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know. I did a Twitch stream last night, and it was super chill. It wasn't meant to be like high energy. I wasn't really doing anything for recording or pushing it to YouTube or anything like that. I was just taking care of some tasks in Minecraft and hanging out with the usual crowd. But I noticed that my energy level was a lot lower. I started streaming at 7 p.m. as opposed to 3 p.m. Normally I do like mid to late afternoon. That tends to be a good spot. I noticed a lot of engagement there on Twitch, but right now it's like last night. I had to adult all day yesterday, so I had to wait until the evening to stream. So, but yeah, I'm a little bit spoiled with the morning recordings. But you and I have had busy weekends. I guess you were probably more of a Thursday Friday storm than I was. I had a big hurricane come through.
We didn't get anything.
You didn't get anything at all, really?
Rained.
Oh wow, interesting.
It rained, and I went to a friend's house, and the rain stopped midday, and that was it.
Well, I mean, I guess it was far enough off the coast for you that you would just get the outskirts. But Hurricane Dorian slammed into Nova Scotia, and it was a Category 2 right up until almost landfall. And then they switched it to a tropical storm, but they were still saying that the winds in places were the same as a Category 2 hurricane. So we're talking, I think it's 80 miles an hour in terms of the wind. It was 130 kilometers an hour sustained, gusts up to 150 at some points. I did not really feel like it was that intense of a storm from my vantage point, from my apartment and my big picture window looking out at the trees.
It doesn't take much in small cities that aren't prepared for it. Like in Florida, they hear Category 1 or 2, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like we're gonna keep working." Like that. Like my dad's been in Florida for so long that when he hears Category 1 or 2, he goes, "Oh, well, they give us the day off from work, but I'll be back to work tomorrow." You know, that's his point of view on it. And when they were talking about this thing heading towards Florida, they were like Category 5, and my dad was like, "The state's gonna sink." And that's when he panics.
Yeah.
He hears 1 or 2 and he goes, it's not a big deal.
Well,
but when it hits someplace like you where you don't get hit with them very often, even a 1 or 2 is bad.
Well, and we had a Category 2 with Hurricane Juan in 2003. The unique situation there is that it stalled over us, and it just was.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a constant pass. It was like it kind of stuck and hung around for a bit. So it really did a lot of damage. And there's quite a lot of damage from Hurricane Dorian. Don't get me wrong. I just didn't think it was that intense from where I was sitting, but I was keeping in touch with things on social media. I managed to keep cell service throughout the whole thing. I lost power for 24 hours, no, 36 hours, and then I lost internet for 48. But that was a result of the power outage. I mean, there's 300,000 people across the province with no power. So a lot of it was related to that, with cell towers and relay stations for the various networks going down to battery power and then eventually running out if they didn't get back up in time. So some people had lost cell service, which was problematic for a lot, because there's a lot of people out there that don't have landlines anymore. They just have their cell phone, including myself. I used to have a landline, but I stopped paying for it a long time ago. Anyway,
Same here.
yeah. Anyway, I mean, it was. You can look up if you look up the hashtag NS Storm on Twitter or Instagram. You will more than likely see some videos and stuff. We had there's a large construction crane that got blown over in Halifax, and that crashed into a
Yeah, I saw
building.
photos of that.
Yeah, there was a lot of trees down, but see, here's the thing. Halifax is a really old city, which means that the trees that are in amongst the buildings and the streets and stuff like that are old, and they're giant sails, right? So the problem with all that rain coming down and then the wind coming up as fast as it did, the ground is soft and these trees just get uprooted. The trees were not necessarily snapping in half. They were just being bent over from the ground. The ground couldn't keep the tree in.
Right.
Things that have been weakened by sidewalks and pavement and all this different construction around the roots of the trees, they're fine on a normal day, but when a hurricane like this comes in, it just kind of uproots everything. And of course, they were ripping into power lines and knocking things over. I didn't see anything too dramatic beyond that. I mean, that was kind of like I was in the same apartment for Hurricane Juan, uh, 14 years ago, and like it was about the same experience. It really wasn't too bad. Um, the one thing that I noticed a lot of though was the storm surge with this particular storm happened to be really intense. The tides went up by, and ocean level went up by like a meter and a half, 2 meters. There was waves that were crashing into the boardwalk in downtown Halifax that were pushing boards like up and out of place. There was a parking lot near one of the apartment complexes downtown Dartmouth where the roofs of the car were just kind of peeking out from the water, and you're like, "Oh, that
Yep.
sucks." Like that's there's a lot of vehicle and property damage along the coastlines, and some of my favorite hikes. I've seen some pictures from some organizations that I follow, and some of the hikes, some of the coastal hikes have been just destroyed. Like there's just the path is just gone. So I'm glad that I went and did those hikes when I could because they're quite changed now.
And it'll be a while before they're back to normal.
Yeah, I mean around here it's a good time of year in that they'll try to get a lot done probably before the winter, but there's a lot of volunteer organizations that will go through with like gravel and chainsaws and will just like chop trees out that are out of the way. One of the hikes that I did earlier this year, there was a tree that was hit by lightning, and
Hmm.
obviously there had been a fire and it was down logs and stuff, but you could see where a hiker had gone through or a volunteer had gone through with the chainsaw and cut a path, through some fallen
Yep.
logs and stuff, so you didn't have to scramble and so you weren't kind of detouring onto a treacherous part of the terrain. You were just kind of staying on the path. So I mean that'll happen fairly soon. I'm sure there's quite a few people, especially the locals that live near these things. And like I do these hikes like once or twice a season, whereas there's people that live in those communities that do them once a weekend, right? Because it's the hike that's nearby. So
Yep.
yeah, we'll see what happens there. But overall, Nova Scotia did not report any major injuries or death, even with that crane coming down. Everybody was just inside and doing their own thing. The only thing that I found was kind of an eye roll was the following day on Sunday. There was a number of Tim Hortons that happened to have power, so there was a lot of people out driving for their coffee and to a point where they were blocking traffic and there was traffic jams and emergency vehicles couldn't get past. It's like, guys, you don't need your Tim Hortons that bad. I on one level it's kind of funny, the big lineups, but on the other hand, it's like if you're blocking traffic, like just you don't need to be out. Like if you don't need to be
Hmm.
out. I mean, it's not that we're not used to hurricanes. We're certainly used to storms. We're certainly used to power outages. We get nor'easters all winter long. So I'll lose power 3 or 4 times this winter, and it'll be out for the better part of the day. But I have a barbecue and I have a couple of cast iron pans and I can boil water and make dinner and do all these things with no power. And
Or you can always prepare in advance too. That's
exactly.
for
And
something that you don't need. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, like it costs what, like $10 to get a little propane canister that'll, you can put a little burner on top of, and you can boil a pot of water. You can, boil a kettle.
Yep.
There's, and I'm not saying that you have to do that for days, but I'm saying like for the 12 hours or 24 hours after the storm, where all the emergency crews are out cleaning up the roads and they need to get around, you should stay home. you know, I mean, I realize it sucks that there's no power and people want their coffee, but like, come on, there was no need to have like hundreds of people lined up outside the Tim Hortons. I found it kind of an eye roll. But and then they were chastised for it. Like the posts online were not necessarily laughing at them. They were kind of like, "Come on, people! Like just get it together," you know?
It's a concept I've never understood. When a storm is over, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take care of things at my house
Yeah.
and get things back in order and sort things out. I'm not interested in going to get a cup of coffee.
No, exactly. Or I mean, at the very least, you should have coffee or enough stuff at home that you could just make it there.
Yep.
I mean, and some people were more prepared than others. I mean, like I went over to my sister's for dinner on Sunday, and her husband works in construction rental. So when he came home from work on Friday, he just brought a generator with him, and so they
Yep.
were able to plug their fridge in and keep their fridge on. They unplugged it overnight because it was noisy. But during the day they packed their upstairs freezer so it stayed frozen overnight. Their fridge stayed cold all day. That's all they needed, and that's the real pain in the butt. Like and I noticed it for me. I want to say halfway through Sunday. So my power had been out for just over 24 hours. And at that point, my freezer's defrosting. The stuff, I'm being very careful whether I'm opening the fridge or not because I want to try to keep everything in there cold. Thankfully, it's at a time of year where it was only like 13 degrees outside. So it wasn't like it was a blistering hot day the very next day where stuff is going to be going bad that much faster. But it's one of those things where after 24 hours, that's when like food starts to defrost and things start to be a
Yep.
real inconvenience. And that's where, I can understand where people start to scramble a little bit. But you would see people that would have power or have generators inviting relatives or friends over to be like, hey, grab all the stuff out of your freezer, throw it in a freezer bag, drive over to my place. We'll throw it in my deep freeze that's got power because of the generator, and we'll keep everything safe. So, but overall,
Yep.
no, it was an interesting weekend. It actually, I'll talk about my pick a little bit later. But it started off with me reading for most of Saturday, which was a nice break from being on my phone and being on the internet and playing video games and stuff like that. Every once in a while, I don't mind being forced to unplug and just kind of chill out. But yeah, anyway, that's kind of what I've been up to. What's been on the big screen for you this week?
Oh, so Memorial Day weekend, I live about 20 minutes from two different drive-ins in each direction from my house. One of the drive-ins was doing a triple feature for the weekend, and the triple feature was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, Crawl, and The Dead Don't Die. And my wife, Erica, wanted to really see Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark because it's based on a kid's book she read as a kid. And I really wanted to see The Dead Don't Die because it's a zombie movie with Bill Murray. How bad could it be? Um, and so we made a deal that we were going to sit through the middle feature, which we didn't know anything about. And it was supposed to start at 7 o'clock and run until like 1 in the morning. So we sat in our car and watched movies till 1 a.m. And Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, it's basically kind of like Stephen King's It, but more directed at kids.
Okay.
Couple of kids go into get chased by a bully into a house, find it's an old abandoned house that there's a spooky story about the girl who used to live there and how there was something wrong with her, and they find a book, like a library in the basement that was basically where the girl was locked up in the basement, and the book is like half empty, and one of the characters takes the book home, and the book starts writing itself and starts telling scary stories about the kids who took the book. And the kids start getting bumped off one by one by one by one by one. And it's written by Guillermo del Toro, so that was interesting. uh it it takes place in the 60s, which is nothing that the trailer ever tells you, because I had seen several trailers for this and I thought it was modern, and
Oh,
then when you watch it, it makes a point of telling you, oh, this is 1968, and I was like, oh, okay. And they even hammer it home that it's 1968 because part of the movie takes place in a drive-in, and it's Night of the Living Dead on the screen at the drive-in, and that came out in 1968.
Nice.
And so I was like, okay, so they're trying to make sure we all understand it's 1968. I get it.
I feel like I'm seeing a lot of that happening in horror films or other thrillers. They do a little bit of a period piece because it eliminates cell phones,
Yep.
and it makes being able to not contact or not knowing what's going on, or being able to call for help, right? It makes it that much more serious.
Right. And overall, I really enjoyed the movie. It was better than I expected. It definitely lines it up for a sequel, and I kind of hope they do
Cool.
the sequel. So I was like, okay, that works for me. Our second feature, Crawl, literally had me banging my head against the steering wheel for 90 minutes.
That's the problem with triple features. There's always one of them that's like, oh, so rough.
Well, I wasn't sure what to expect because when I went to Rotten Tomatoes, this thing has like a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, or at least it did the week I saw it. And I was like, it can't be that bad. And everybody kept, all the reviews I kept reading say, oh, it's like Jaws, but with alligators. And I was like, okay, I can handle that. And that's not what it is at all. It's really bad. Uh, the acting in it is fine. Like the acting in it is great. The script is terrible. Whoever wrote it has obviously never been to the state of Florida in their entire life because all of the architecture and all of the stuff is totally not Floridian in any way, shape, or form. Like the entire movie takes place in a basement. Florida houses don't have basements because the water level's too high.
Right. Yeah.
And I have been to Florida homes that do have basements, but you're talking about like a 10 by 10 room that's there in case of a storm.
Yeah, like I had this conversation with some of the people in my Discord chat where they were looking at the damage from Hurricane Dorian and asking like, are these houses on slabs? Like, how is it built? And I was like, oh no, you're from a different part of the continent. All of these houses are 150 years old and have like poured concrete basements, and in
Yep.
many cases finished basements. So flooding around
Yep.
here equals major damage.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so not only does this take place in a basement, but the girl, the basic premise is there's this girl, she's in college. Her dad's kind of been overbearing her whole life. And he just went through a divorce with her mother. And it's been about a lot of infighting. And she gets a call from a sister who lives up north and is like, hey, I know that Cat 5 hurricane is coming your way. Have you heard from dad? And she goes, no. She's like, well, would you do me a favor and go drive down? You're only like an hour away. Can you go check on him? And she's like, I'm not really talking to dad. And she's like, well, suck it up and go check on him because nobody's heard from him. And so the girl goes, fine, whatever. And she drives an hour south down the highway and gets off at the exit. And literally the police officers are like, you can't go this way. And she drives her four-wheel vehicle off road and goes around and does the things she's not supposed to do to go rescue her dad. And you're like, this isn't going to end in disaster.
Yeah.
And so she gets to he's living in a condo but selling his house. She gets to the condo, finds his dog, takes his dog, and goes to the house because she assumes that's where he is. She gets to the house, and the water is like ankle deep around the house. So you're like, okay, yeah, there's a little bit of flooding. And she goes in the house, and the dog literally goes straight to the basement door and starts barking. She wanders through the whole house, and she's like, Dad, where are you? And in the meantime, the dog is at a basement door going, woof, woof. And you're like,
Timmy's fall down the well.
yeah, and you're like, just follow the dog. Just follow the dog. And this is a 90-minute movie, and I'm not joking. Her wandering around this house is like 6 minutes, 8 minutes. And you're like, really?
So bad.
Yeah. And so then she goes down in the basement, and the water in the basement is like knee deep. And she finds her dad floating in the basement, and something bit his leg. And he's unconscious. He whacked his head. And she wakes him up, and he's like, oh, there's an alligator down here. We gotta get out of here. And she's like, an alligator? And then lo and behold, like Jaws, a giant alligator shows up in the basement and like bites the thing. But as I was saying, if there is a basement in Florida, it's like a 10 by 10 room. I'm not joking when I say this. The basement in this house is like an underground catacomb.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's like 12 rooms. There's pipes running through the middle of a hallway. At one point, she gets tangled through a bunch of cable that's just running interlaced through the middle of a hallway. I'm like, this is not believable to me in any way, shape, or form. And it starts out making you think that there's like one alligator that's blocking their way to the door. And I'm like, okay, all right, it's not great, but this is believable. Well, then she kills the alligator, and it's revealed, oh no, that's one of 3 alligators in this basement. And you're like, what? And the first thing I know is alligators don't normally hunt in packs or travel in groups. They're very solitary creatures.
Hmm.
And we're talking all of these alligators are like 16 feet long, which is like max size for an alligator. So every time one shows up, you're looking at the max size one of these things can be.
Yeah.
They're usually not this big.
Yeah. No, well, and it's the kind of thing where it's just, they weren't really, I don't think, concerned with.
Well, the thing that the part of it that sucks is that it's treating everything really serious. Like, oh, we're gonna drown. Like, it's not like Sharknado where there's like a joke about the sharks are a hurricane. Ha ha ha. Ha.
Right.
You know, it's literally like it's life or death. The water's filling up in the basement. Oh my god, what are we gonna do? Oh, and it's like all dead serious. And then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, but yet there's 3 alligators. And then the thing that kills me is then all of a sudden there's like this 10-15 minute sequence of this guy, like they show her drive up to the dad's house, right? And it's just a house in suburbia, and you never see the gas station. But then later on, like they point at an angle you would have obviously seen when she drove up, and there is now a gas station across the street from the house and a looter trying to steal gas out of the gas station, and then like 7 alligators eat him. And you're like, where was that gas station 20 minutes ago?
Yeah. It's really inconsistent, it sounds like.
Yeah. And then the only reason that guy shows up and gets eaten is because they use his boat to escape towards the end of the movie.
Right. Like the boat needed to be there. We have things are not consistent. We need to make sure that we show the audience this boat, 20
And they're
minutes
only
before
in the
they need
boat
it.
for 5 minutes. They're
Yeah.
only in the boat 5 minutes before it gets tipped and they have to climb up on the roof of the house. Because all of a sudden now the water, by the time they get out of the basement, the water is now like up over the house almost. And I'm like, well, that moved fast.
Yeah, and how does that work? If the water level outside is above the roof, the basement
like
should be underwater.
And she was just in the house after they got out of the basement fighting an alligator in their living room for like 5 minutes. Like,
yeah.
Okay. And the whole movie is like that. And my favorite part is, and I had to look it up because it irked me so much, is at one point her dad gets separated from her and he's like 100 yards away, and he shouts to her, "You can swim. You can do it." And she jumps in the water and she outswims an alligator that's chasing her. And I went, that doesn't happen. And so I looked it up. An alligator moves at 25 miles an hour in the water. An Olympic swimmer, what's his name? Michael Phelps, max swim speed is 6 miles an hour. She's dead.
I love that you looked that up.
Well, I looked at it and I went,
6 miles an hour.
And I'm like, wait a minute. And so I looked at it and I went, this doesn't make sense. And I said, Crawl, can a human person swim? And it brought up an article someone actually wrote about this movie. It said, Michael Phelps swims 6 miles an hour. Alligators swim at 25 without trying. And I'm like, she's dead.
Especially because it's a max size alligator. Like it's a 16-foot alligator.
Oh yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right.
So tell me about The Dead Don't Die. How did Bill Murray fare against the zombies?
Okay, so I've been excited about this movie for a while because it's an indie horror movie with Bill Murray and Adam Driver, and I was like, I like both these guys. Tilda Swinton is in this. Steve Buscemi has a cameo. Tom Waits is in it. Like the list of this movie might as well just say, hey, every celebrity you've ever heard of that needs work, here. We put him in this movie. And so I've been excited about it. And the idea is this small podunk town, and zombies seem to show up, and Adam Driver and Bill Murray are kind of like the local sheriff. And I was like, okay, I can get behind this. And it immediately starts with what seems very, very promising. Adam Driver, Bill Murray are riding around a car, and they're talking about how it's like 8 or 9 o'clock at night, but the sun is still in the sky because there's something weird going on. And there's weird weather and things are strange. And you're like, okay, I can get behind this. Something weird's going on. That's going to explain the zombies later. Okay, I get it. And literally, Adam Driver says something about, yeah, I don't know why we're in this movie. And you're like, wait, did he just reference that he's in a movie? And you're like, and so like they do the like Deadpool thing where they break the fourth wall a few times. Like at one point towards the end of the movie, Adam Driver and Bill Murray get into an argument over what the script says.
Okay.
And every time it happened, it made me laugh. And I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of clever. Like this seems more like a stage play than an actual movie.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, about 15 minutes in, it hits you over the head that this entire movie is political propaganda disguised as a zombie movie, and not even subtly. The reason zombies are here is because we're fracking in the South and North Poles, and we've tilted the planet off the axis, and the Republicans and the Democrats can't agree on whether or not the poles are switching. And
That's weird.
you're like, okay, all right. And then the zombies show up, and like literally people can't agree on whether or not the zombies are here. Tilda Swinton plays a samurai.
Of course she does.
She's a samurai mortuary, runs the local mortuary, and ends up cutting up a bunch of zombies, and weird stuff happens to her throughout the whole movie. And every time it introduces you to a character, like they get killed later, and you're like, okay, it's a zombie movie, I can get behind it. But then they start commenting about how like everybody's gonna die before this movie's over, and you're like, are they? And they don't. But you're like, I don't get it. Like it ended, and I just went, well, I'm glad I saw it, but I'm probably never gonna watch this again. So do yourself a favor. Don't watch this.
Yeah, avoid crawl and evolve, and avoid the dead don't die. That's disappointing because I like Adam Driver and I like Bill Murray.
I won't lie. When they were on camera, I was engrossed in the film. Even when the dialogue was bad, even when the plot didn't make sense, their chemistry together was awesome.
And if you've not seen Adam Driver in other smaller indie films, I can't remember the name of it, but he was in a film with the kid that played Harry Potter. What's his name? I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, people know who I mean.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's in a movie. It's like a romantic. It's like an indie romance movie, and he plays the best friend. But he's a little weird, you know. He does such a good job. Like I remember watching it, going like, "Wow, this is Kylo Ren." Like I'm watching somebody that is wildly known as a very different character in a very different universe, and he just kind of pulls off whatever he does. And I've seen a couple of articles of people praising Adam Driver and his acting. And my I guess naivete going into it is that I'm not usually interested in the indie kind of movies that he does on a regular basis. But apparently they're really good. And so if you see Adam Driver in things, I would encourage people to check it out. And I'm not surprised because Bill Murray is also a very subtle actor. Like he's got a great mind and
like they have this great dialogue because there's the first bunch of people get killed by zombies, and in the daytime the zombies are gone, and they show up at this diner and everybody in the diner is dead, and Bill Murray goes, "Oh, that's awful in there." And Adam Driver looks over at him and goes, "Do you want my take on it?" And he goes, "Yeah, what do you think?" And he goes, "I think zombies did it." And he goes, "Wow, really? You're going there, huh?" Like, and like their dialogue is just like I can't tell if it was actually written or if the two of them were improvising like
Right.
that. And they just play off each other so well that you're like, this is kind of awesome. And then next thing you know, weird stuff happens. Tom Waits wandering around in the woods killing zombies and eating chickens, and you're like, what am I watching?
Oh, that's too funny.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, it makes political statements on everything from global warming, the homeless, uh, uh, uh prisons, adolescents. It has a statement on pretty much just about everything, and none of it is subtle. It pretty much is about as ham-fisted as you could lay across the idea in one way or another. And every single time I went, oh, give me Bill Murray again, please.
yeah. Daniel Radcliffe is the name that I
Yeah.
could not conjure because I'm a moron, and for whatever reason, I couldn't figure that out. I enjoy him and other stuff too, and really have enjoyed his interviews on like the Graham Norton show and stuff. He's a funny guy. But yeah, it's
He's definitely not the kid actor he was like
no,
15 years ago.
no. And if I look up like Radcliffe and Driver, I'm trying to figure out what movie that was in. I think it was the F Word, maybe. I think that might have been
Could
the
be.
one. Yeah, or What If? I think maybe What If is the movie I'm thinking of. It was good. I quite enjoyed it. Um, for me, with the hurricane, just before we lost power this weekend, I had started a new series because thanks to the wonderful support of people on Twitch, I was able to pick up my new um, processor for my computer.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of doing that, I signed up for Amazon Prime because I had a 30-day trial. I was like, whoa, crap, I thought I would have used this long ago. So why not? Let's see what's up. Because outside of The Dark Crystal, I've been a little frustrated with the content on Netflix. And a lot of what was coming on Amazon Prime looked really interesting. So I checked it out and I started watching Carnival Row, which is on Prime Video. And
This has been on my list, but I have been hesitant to watch because I've heard mixed things, and I've been like, it sounds a little too heavy for me
so
right now.
I'm 3 episodes in. So this will be spoiler free because there's a couple of things that happen in the first and the third episode. There's a lot of like backstory that's revealed, and I wouldn't want to spoil it. It's more interesting to go into it cold. But essentially, it is a very unique, very inventive take on fairy tale creatures like pixies, pucks, centaurs, all that kind of stuff. To set it up, it's sort of like fictitious, sort of industrial age England, but it's not
Yeah.
England. It's called the Burg. So the Burg is essentially one human settlement or kingdom. But it's not, there's not castles and forests and stuff so much as there's
Right.
buildings and steam. And I don't remember seeing electricity, but I don't remember seeing a lot of candles either. So it's like this weird kind of like gas
It
lamp
could be
sort of
it could be
situation.
magic for all you know
Well,
that's
no,
lighting up.
there's like that's the other thing they're pretty straight on. The magic is not in the Berg. Like they don't get into that too much.
Gotcha.
And any kind of magic that they kind of allude to, it's not like spiritual kind of point your magic wand and something cool happens. It's more like voodoo. Like it's more like sacrifices and blood magic and
Okay.
like darker stuff
Gotcha.
like that. So I mean, it's not a show for that you can have on with kids in the background. Some of the violence in it kind of borders on Game of Thrones. Not in a like so much in your face way, but it's like it's essentially there's a serial killer on the loose murdering fae or fantasy folk in the Burg, and Rycroft, played by Orlando Bloom, is a former soldier, now criminal investigator, and he is on the case, and he for various reasons has an affinity for the fae because he is trying to look out for these Fae victims because the government looks down on the Fae. They are treated as immigrants as lower class citizens. And so when they're being murdered, the police force is not exactly doing what they should to investigate the crimes. Whereas if someone in higher society was murdered, you could bet your butt that the police would be all over it. And so that's kind of like
Right.
they're poking at themes of violence, racism, classism, immigrant refugee status and relations, and religion. But they don't bang you over the head with it, which is what I like.
Oh, good. Oh,
It's
good, because
it's
I was worried that's what they were gonna do.
yeah. I mean, they have. I mean, it's not subtle because there are essentially racist cops, and the racist cops are against the Fae. But the things that they say about them, and because the bottom race in this story is fantasy folk, the fantasy folk come in all different colors, right? So you have like African American actors, you've got Hispanic, you've got Asian people, and they're not being discriminated against because of their skin color. They're being discriminated against because they've got horns or wings or four
Yeah,
legs. Like so. There's these really interesting ways of addressing it, and then amongst um, the Berg, while I want to say a lot of the folks there are Caucasian, that could just be the actors, the main actors that you see talking. No, that's a lie. You know what? Rycroft's like second in command. His little constable that he goes around with is, I think, East Indian. So there's a number of different cultures that are appropriated into the Berg as well. But it's the classism that really comes through. It's the kind of way that England was divided, with like the lower classes and the upper classes and the snooty bureaucrats looking down at the gutter trash and all that kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, and I like how gritty it is. Like it feels like uh, kind of like England set in like Pirates of the Caribbean sort of situation. Like it feels like late 1700s, early 1800s sort of deal.
That's
Um,
kind of the vibe I got from the trailer.
Yeah. So there's no motorized cards. Everything's all pulled by horses, but then you've got blimps. So like there's this weird kind of like steampunky push of technology where, like Rycroft will grab a shotgun, and yet at the time it would be more like muskets, right?
Right.
In terms of some of the other tech that you're seeing. So they've got this kind of really nice mix of stuff. And it feels like what they're pushing is like taking like where America would be with technology, but transforming it and putting it over in like an 18 or 17th to 18th century England, which is or
Right.
Europe, I guess in general. There's another faction, and think it's called the Pact. I don't really remember. We haven't seen much of them. They're essentially the bad guys. They're like a socialist, kind of like a Nazi like regime. But we've not seen enough of them to make it like for me to judge as to whether it's been like a Nazi ripoff. What we know is that the Pact and the people of the Berg fought over the kingdom of the Fae because the Berg was trying to save it, the Pact was trying to enslave it for its riches, and so the Berg didn't want to stand for that because they wanted to stand up for the good of life and all things
Yeah.
good and wholesome. But the Berg lost, and when they lost, they pulled out. They abandoned this kingdom. I don't remember the name of it. And so the Fae, while they're escaping their kingdom and their home away from the Pact and trying to get to the Berg, when they arrive at the Berg, they've got no love for the Berg because the Berg abandoned them, and the Berg is feeling the economical strain of overflowing, refugees that are not necessarily taking jobs, but like that's kind of how they're looking at it. So it's got this really kind of current but very unique kind of take on everything. It's very
Hmm.
well written. It's a very well thought out world. Extraordinarily well acted. I really like Orlando Bloom. Like not for a moment do you think about like Legolas and stuff like that. Like he's
Yeah.
or even Pirates of the Caribbean. He's also a bit older now, so he's got a gruffer kind of appearance and a gruffer way of delivering his lines, and plus the English slang that they use in it is gruffer. It's not like a proper kind of like higher society thing. He and the rest of the police force have a little bit more of a lower. I think it's lower London, but it's kind of a gruffer accent. Again, it reminds me of like when Johnny Depp was playing Jack Sparrow,
Right.
like that kind of a vernacular. But then Carla Delevingne is also
Mhm.
in it. She plays Vignette Stonemoss. She plays a fae. I think she's a pixie. They keep on calling them Pix for short. They look like fairies, but I think pixie would be the more appropriate thing. So she's got wings and fluts around like a hummingbird sort of idea. And so she gets into the burg and has to do her own thing because she can't be. I think she tries to be a lady's maid, and that doesn't work out. So there's all these like different twists and turns, and uh, a relationship that's like in the trailers, but they kind of delve into what happened and why between Rycroft and Vignette and how
Yeah.
their kind of like relationship has evolved over time. They have a history and it goes back to the war. And that's the third episode that I just finished is like a flashback episode where they actually show the two of them meeting and give you that backstory. And that's why I don't want to talk too much about it in the first two episodes because it's a much nicer way to experience it when you're trying to guess, when you're trying to put things together. I'm glad they didn't show episode three on episode one because then you would have known everything, right?
Right. Unfortunately, I think what did a disservice for me was when Amazon put the trailers together. The trailers were that backstory of the war,
Mm.
and those were both the trailers for this. It was one from him and one from her, and I felt like that basically went, "Oh, okay."
Well, there's more to it because I saw the trailer.
Oh, right, and I agree. If you what you're telling me sounds more interesting than what those trailers were showing me, but those trailers were a little misleading, and I went,
Yeah.
"Oh,
So essentially, this whole serial killer thing, it's kind of like this cat and mouse game where Rycroft is essentially reminds me of like trying to find Jack the Ripper is essentially what he's
yeah,
looking at. They're looking for a racist killer killing Faye, or so they think. And just around episode three is where things get really complicated and even more fantastical. And that's where I'm just like, okay, cool. It's not what I thought it was, and that's where I'm like, sweet. Like I like that it's taking me in different twists and turns. And I love the fact that there's a murder mystery in amongst this
hmm
like fantasy world building. And that is kind of where I'm really enjoying it. And I'm going to keep on watching it. I'm having trouble because it's very dark. It's like you said, like it's something that you kind of have to be in the mood for. And
hmm
it's heavy. Like if you're looking for something light, this is not the show for you. There's not a lot of smiling or joking. There's a lot of serious themes that are kind of all jammed into this one show. Um, and it's just so well acted. Like when there's a Puck character that is living in a very well-to-do neighborhood, and of course all the neighbors don't like that. But
right,
the conversations that he has and the stilted, awkward kind of like racial undertones of all the conversations. It's not that it's hard to watch, but it's just so well acted. You just completely forget that he's a Puck. Like you just feel like he's being discriminated against, and you just look at this. And after the world that they set up, you know that this character has had nothing but an uphill battle their entire life. You know, like they struggle to survive the war, escape the pact, and when they get to the Berg and try to contribute to society, society is like, we don't want you. And so you can understand just how angry this person is. And they do an absolutely fantastic job because there's no angry acting. Like they don't necessarily just get louder when bad stuff happens. It's all measured because that's kind of how English society was, right? Like there's
hmm
just there's this underlying anger that they have to keep bottled up, and they do that very very well in the show. So yeah, I'm very curious to see where things go from here. I'm on board. It's just it's one of those things where I can only really watch like one every couple days, just because well, one I don't want to blow through it, but two it's a heavy show to watch.
yeah.
Um,
You can't take more than an episode or two, and then you're like,
yeah,
"Okay, I'll watch this again in a few days."
it's really gritty, and if you like that kind of stuff with like werewolves and pixies and pucks and centaurs and that kind of idea, that kind of imagination, they take everything has a unique twist on it. Everything has like a steampunky or a technological twist to it that just makes you go, oh, okay, so this is not what I expected. Like you think werewolf, you think you know what they mean, but then nope, you don't. It's something else, and it still stays true to those themes, but then they get into some, you know details about it that you wouldn't necessarily think about, and I
Hmm.
like that they keep it kind of visceral, which is cool. But speaking of world building, this is where my weekend kind of took a spiral, and I'm really glad it did. With the power out, I decided to jump into a couple of books that I hadn't had the opportunity to crack, and I've embarrassingly had this on my shelf for probably a year, very close to it. I think it might have been a Christmas gift from last year, but it's called World of Warcraft Chronicle, and it's not a novel. It's more like an encyclopedia of stories that relates to World of Warcraft and the universe that it's set in.
Hmm.
So this is one of three existing volumes, and not until you get into volume 2 and 3 do you start to to hear about characters and current events in the World of Warcraft that you would have either experienced in the game or in the RTS game Warcraft. This starts off with like the beginning of the cosmos and the existing planes of existence and the structure of the pantheon of gods that kind of made things and pushed things into being. And so no prior knowledge of Warcraft is really needed. I was lucky enough to, having spent several years playing Warcraft, that some of this was familiar, but some of it was also alien and unfamiliar because it either didn't exist in the game when I was playing, or it wasn't well communicated in the game when I was playing. Uh,
Yeah, there may be one line of dialogue in reference to it, but you'd have to have listened to 300 hours of a dialogue to even have heard that one
yeah, like
2 second. Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that's expanded upon, and I feel like the farther expansions, like once you got into Mists of Pandaria and then passed into Warlords, like that's when they really started to explore the greater universe. And I know that there was a space out there, that there was more than just one planet, because in the Burning Crusade, that's when the Draenei characters became available, and they're from another planet. Like that's not a secret. Orcs are from another planet too, but they don't arrive via spaceship. They arrive via a mystical portal, like a
yeah.
magic gate. So that keeps it in the fantasy realm. But Warcraft has gotten very science fiction in the last little while, from what I can tell from just watching cinematics and stuff. I tend to be more interested in the things where it's like the battle for the Teldrassil or Teldrassil, heart tree or world tree, that sort of thing. But this was a really cool read because there are some illustrations and some beautiful paintings inside of it, but most of it is just like these short little stories that kind of break down the world, the gods, and how things kind of came to be. And so, to kind of give a Cole's Notes version, there are six cosmic forces opposed to one another. So, if you think about like the six corners of a hexagon, you've got light and shadow, you've got order and disorder, or order and chaos, as I like to think about it, and then life and death. And so there are these six forces constantly pulling on one another to kind of keep everything in balance. And then there's six powers that coincide with those six forces. So light and shadow is holy and shadow. Order and disorder is arcane and fell. And that to me was always confusing because arcane to me sounds evil. So it depends on
Hmm.
what fantasy world you're into, but sometimes arcane magic is like evil magic. But in Warcraft, arcane is order magic and fell is disorder magic. And then you've got life and death, which is nature, kind of like druids and life and all that kind of stuff. And then necromancy and death. So like undead and warlocks and all that kind of thing. And then this is where I always thought it was more complicated than it needed to be in the game. And it was never really clear about this. And the book did a better job of explaining. There's four realms of existence, not six. And so the realms of existence, if you think about like the six cosmic powers as a flat surface, like a flat, kind of like a compass rose, the four realms of existence are kind of like stacked vertically. So,
Hmm.
in terms of the trying to break it down, you've got the great dark beyond, which is just essentially like how we would think about the universe, galaxy, planets, space, that sort of thing. There's the twisting nether, which is another dimension altogether. There's the emerald dream, which is a dream realm, and that's where you get into more fantasy stuff. And then the Shadowlands, and the Shadowlands is essentially the underworld in terms of like Greek mythology. That's kind of like how that works.
Yeah.
It's not a cave, it's not underground, it's not hell. It's just this kind of like dead dimension. Similar to how like when Hercules has to go to the underworld, he physically goes down or does something in the world, but he's passing into another realm. Sort of like how in Norse mythology and in I guess in the MCU, Thor explains the nine realms. You know, you've got Jotunheim and you've got Earth and you've got like all these different places. And so these four realms, you can kind of go into these different realms in the game, and it's sometimes it's explained really well, and sometimes it's not. But the twisting nether is it's like a place between worlds. So where reality, the great dark beyond, meets the Shadowlands and the void, that's where the twisting nether exists because everything is pushing and pulling on it all the time. So there's this other plane of existence. Um, Once you get into the gods, everything starts to become a little bit more ordered because those are the things that you relate to more having played the game. And
Mm.
so what I like about it is that, I mean, in some ways, it borrows heavily without real imagination from like Norse, Egyptian, and Greek mythology. In
Mm.
other ways, it's a lot more inventive, depending on like names and stuff like that. For example, one of the gods is named Ra, and it's not even attempted to be spelled differently from the Egyptian god. Um,
Of course not.
yeah, but then other times it's it's a lot more inventive. So like Amun-Thul is one of the main pantheon of gods, and he would be very similar to like a Zeus kind of character.
Yeah.
But nothing about his name says anything other than just like that's just really kind of inventive. It doesn't say anything about Zeus. It doesn't conjure that. Whereas like there's other gods or other I guess sub gods, and it's like Thorin and Loken. And it's like really you didn't really take the time to go any farther than that, you
No.
know. So that kind of stuff I find a little bit tricky. But the Titans are the gods. So instead of one deity, there are many deities that kind of create the worlds or have the power of gods in the world of Warcraft. And I think there's like six or eight of them, and they all have different personalities. They all have like a number of different traits and things like, warrior, life, death. They all manage different aspects. They all have different interests in the six cosmic forces. Um, when the gods get to Azeroth, which is the planet that you play on in World of Warcraft, they create the Titan Forged. So the Titans make the Titan Forged. Makes sense. The Titan Forged are essentially the gods kind of like personified on Azeroth. So these gods are kind of like interstellar beings. You don't really get to see them. They just kind of exist across all planes. Whereas the Titan Forged are very much physically in the universe on Azeroth, very often made of like stone or metal or something. So they're tangible. And so the Titans make the Titan Forged and then create ranks where they give some of the Titan Forged the rank of Keeper, and those Keepers are then embedded with the personalities of the Titans. And it starts to get a lot more complicated from there, and I won't get into all the details, but it was a very, very cool read of like, you know, one god like Amun-Thul would create two keepers, Ra and I can't remember the other one, Odin, I think. And so both Ra and Odin would have Amun-Thul's powers, his personality, but they would have different responsibilities on Azeroth. And so it was really cool. You've got this pantheon of six gods or eight gods that then turn into 12 or 14 Titan forged keepers. And then the Titan forged are just like a larger army of just like god-like creatures. And that takes care of all like the deities. But then to kind of balance things out, they have wild gods, which are essentially primal manifestations of life and nature. So things like, a boar spirit, a tiger spirit, a crane spirit, that sort of thing. You've got elemental spirits, which are just the forces of nature, of elements, just kind of like made into a being, like an earth elemental, an air elemental, fire, water, that sort of thing. And then to balance it all out, there's the Void Lords, which I know very little about. I haven't really gotten that far. and the old gods. And I always thought the old gods and the Titans were related. And the game doesn't do a good job of separating out the old gods. Like the old gods just make you think like they're what came before the Titans,
Hmm.
because that's what it's like in Greek mythology, right? There's
Right.
there's the I think they're called the Titans. So there's the Titans, which are essentially the old gods, and then there's the new gods, which is the pantheon of like Zeus and Athena and all that kind of stuff. But in Warcraft, the old gods are evil things that are sent out by the Void Lords, and the Void Lords are stuck in the void; they can't get out. So they're trying to influence our universe as best they can, and the old gods are kind of like their instrument of influence. And so they send the old gods out to kind of infect the universe. So most of the early history of these worlds are the Titan forged fighting the old gods. And a lot of these stories are very small. They're only like a half paragraph page where it's like, the Void Lords and the birth of the old gods, and then the rise of the demons, and it's all just to kind of explain kind of matter of fact. And I
Hmm.
really like it. It's I have no inclination to go back and play World of Warcraft Classic, which is really big right now because it's the vanilla game from 2012, no 2006, and I just don't have the time for that kind of thing. But reading this book, knowing this, really has me curious about what it would be like to go back and play a World of Warcraft character from the beginning, knowing this, like knowing this information. Uh, I'm wondering how much different it would be to experience those major story plot lines as you get into the Twisting Nether, demons. Something that I remember distinctly from Mists of Pandaria were the August Celestials. What I didn't realize is that the August Celestials are wild gods, and they've all been around since the dawn of wild gods. But the game, to its credit, which I think is an excellent way of world building, when you encounter those wild gods, they've been part of Pandaren culture for centuries. So
Right.
all of the different cultures on Pandaria and the Pandaren specifically have appropriated the wild gods and built their religion around those wild gods. So when you encounter them as the Pandaren explain them to you, not in the context of this book. And so
Right.
what I like about this book is that it explains like, oh no, so even though this is the first time that you've seen something like uh, Nizuo, the black ox, or Zuin, the white tiger. These are wild gods that I remember having to fight for and do missions for in Mists of Pandaria. What you also don't realize is that there's a mother wisp and a razor boar that I remember hearing about, and colossal bears, Ursak and Ursol. And those are all older wild gods that exist in World of Warcraft, but you don't realize that they're all part of the same level. And I thought it was really,
Right.
really cool that, having encountered four of these spirits, the crane, ox, white tiger, and jade serpent in Pandaria, now that I know where they're from, it makes me kind of look at those other things like the colossal bear lords and the mother wisp and stuff very differently. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and I'd love to go back and kind of play it. I know that it would be a much different leveling experience now too. Of course, with the modern game, you level a lot faster, and they might have had some story cleanup and stuff. I unfortunately got really confused when I was playing Cataclysm because in Cataclysm, you end up going into the elemental plane, which is not explained very well in the game. Physically and visually in the game, it looks like you just go down into a hole, but you
Right.
end up going into the earth realm. Or you go into what looks like a dungeon, but really you're traveling to the fire realm, like or the realm of elements. And that to me was not super well communicated. So I was like, I don't really understand what's going on. And then of course Pandaria came out before I finished Cataclysm, and I just jumped into Pandaria. Wanted to play with friends and wanted to kind of keep on playing and play the new stuff that everybody else was talking about. So I never really finished Cataclysm. I just kind of like read about it and then like realized, okay, good. And to my knowledge, in most of the popular culture, Cataclysm is not looked upon as people's favorite expansion
Yeah.
because the story is apparently pretty kludgy. But anyway, this book I feel sort of irons out a bit of my confusion around Cataclysm and where things are. I don't know where things are now because I've been out of the game for a while, and of course, this book doesn't go that far. A lot of what I'm into now is the discovery of the different races of Azeroth and where they came from. And what I find so interesting is that some of the races, not all, but some of the races on the planet are actually descended from the gods, where the old gods give the Titan Forged the curse of flesh to create death, and death gives them power. And the Titan Forged, as more and more Titan Forged are made with this curse of flesh, they get closer and closer and closer to humans, which I thought was really cool because essentially they're mountainous beings of stone and metal, and then they're slightly diminutive and more fleshy, and then they're a lot smaller and mostly flesh, and then they're people. And it's just, I mean, that's simplifying it, but it's such a really
Yeah.
neat concept that, you know, essentially there's descended from gods, and then the uh, the trolls, I don't remember exactly how the trolls came into being. I think the trolls were just like a sentient life that just evolved on Azeroth because you've got the pantheon of gods doing their thing and creating life in some ways. But then also just like the wild gods and the elements of nature will just make life. Like they'll just, you know, things will just evolve, you know, like cobalts and like monkeys and apes and all this different stuff. The wildlife kind of does its own thing. The wildlife doesn't necessarily
Right.
need a god to say you have been made. It's more like, well, the forces of nature just kind of like have their way and do stuff. And in some ways they're kind of like they're meant to reflect the wild god. So like a boar that's naturally appearing in the world is probably a former servant of like the boar god, you know, made to look in their image, but then eventually freed and just kind of made wild. So there's all this kind of heavy stuff that gets into it, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It's such a dense book that it's hard to communicate in just a small segment on the podcast, but if you happen to pick it up, it's a big, beautiful book, and it's so well communicated. Like there's no fluff, there's no plot, there's no character that you're following through all of this. It's just a matter of fact, like this happened and then this happened and these gods made these things and that's how it is. And then on to the next thing. And these are the void lords and these are the old gods and these are the demons and what they do. And it really starts to give you a picture of the platform, like the theater of war, you know, in the World of Warcraft and what you're kind of stepping into. And really have to tip my hat. I mean, it's written by Chris Metzen. There's a couple of different forwards by different authors, and I'm sure there's a lot of other contributing factors in it. But I mean, it is worth picking up if you like this kind of world building. And even if you haven't played World of Warcraft in like forever, I would still say grab it because it's a fun trip down, you know, memory lane in some places, and it's also like super informative in others.
It definitely sounds like more Warcraft than I've played or watched or had anything to do with in years and years and years.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember I'm recognizing names like some of the old gods. One of them uh was in the World of Warcraft movie, not physically, but like the name was mentioned as like an evil
Yeah.
influence sort of thing, and you're like, oh, okay, that's why I know that name, you know. And
Yeah.
some of them come up too, and I would recognize them from Hearthstone because Hearthstone would have like different packs and different like event reveals, and some of the cards were like old god cards, and the expansion would be revolving around the old gods for fun, you know, in Hearthstone. But then I'm getting to actually read like what they were and how they, you know, what they were influencing and what they were doing. Um, they don't get into like explanations about like the old gods in terms of like why they are how they are. They just say, these are the old guards. They're terrible
Yeah.
tentacle beings that have multiple eyes. It's very kind of Cthulhu esque,
Yeah.
but they're sentient and they have, you know, wills and not necessarily personalities, but they have uh, a mission. They have a will of action, And so by telling you what those actions are and what that will is, you kind of know kind of like what the steps are that are going to be taken. It's yeah, like I said, it's pretty cool. Well, that brings us into the Internet Minute, which is brought to you by you. If you enjoy the Citadel Cafe, we are 100% listener supported. If you're getting value out of the show, please consider putting a little bit of value back in. You can become a member at patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe. Joining at any level will get you an invite to the Patreon-only Discord, and there are also bonus episodes up on the Patreon page for members as well. Right now, we're sitting at 18 patrons. I'd love to get that back up to 20, which is where we were this summer, which was an all-time high. Head over to patreon.com/the Citadel Cafe and join today. I don't have an internet pick this week, but Lou, you do.
I have two. They're both going to be real quick. I don't have a whole lot on each one of them, but I read a news article this morning in my news feed that KFC has a dating simulator game coming to Steam in about 2 weeks. It's called I Love You, Colonel Sanders, a finger-licking good dating simulator.
Oh, God.
And there's like an anime Colonel Sanders, and there's other characters, and it's supposed to be like you working in a KFC kitchen, and it looks weird, but if it's free, which is what I hear, then I definitely for free, I'll definitely look at it.
It sounds inappropriate and hilarious, is what it sounds
Yes.
like. Yeah.
And I don't know if you know, but this is not the first time KFC has done a video game.
No, I did not know that.
KFC did a VR video game back when VR headsets were like the hip new thing. And basically you're locked in a dungeon and the Colonel is telling you how to make Colonel Sanders chicken, and you can't escape the dungeon unless you make KFC chicken for the Colonel. And there's like a painting that talks to you, and it's all in VR. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube. There's people that have done entire playthroughs of it. It's really, really funny to watch. And this looks like they're just... unfortunately, I don't really like KFC, and I have one down the street from me, but I always appreciate their marketing.
I haven't had fried chicken in ages.
I go to Popeyes instead of KFC because I have both near me. So
we've got KFC around. Mary Brown's is the other brand, one that's up here, but I can't say it. Like they're not all over the place. Like it's not easily accessible for me. Like there's a McDonald's and Tim Hortons everywhere. Like I can easily get those. Same with Wendy's. But when I get fast food, I tend to want to go for pizza. So I'll order like a local pizza joint before I go for fried chicken. Something else I haven't had in a while either is Chinese food. And I say Chinese food. It's more like, we call it Canadian Chinese cuisine because it's much different than authentic kind of Chinese food. But again, same thing. I don't go for chains because the only chains that do Chinese food are usually in the malls.
And they're usually really bad.
Yeah, and they're usually terrible. Yeah. So the ones that I usually go for are like there's a family-owned place called Hing Wing just up the street, and it's like a 10-minute walk. And it's the kind of place where like May, the little old lady that runs it, doesn't know my name, but I'd walk in, especially back when I first moved into this apartment and I was doing it more often. I'd walk in and she'd be just like, "Oh, order number 4," just like she would know me by my order number, not necessarily by my name, which it was pretty funny.
We have a place around the corner from us that we call in and we order probably once or twice a month. And we pretty much get the same like 2 or 3 things. And as soon as he hears my wife's voice, he goes, "So you want this, 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 and this?" And she goes, "Yes." and we don't even have to order. He knows the order. My other thing that people should be aware of for Internet Minute here is Steam is getting an update soon. And if you have Steam beta access, which is free, all you have to do is go into your options and say that you want beta access. You'll actually get this update either this week or next week.
Oh, cool.
There's going to be a new store page. All of your layout of your games that you own is going to be different. You're supposed to be able to sort things out by like tags and stuff. It sounds like it's going to be a whole new experience. I've seen some screenshots of it. This is something that Steam needed to do like 15 years ago.
I was about to say, it's one of my least favorite things about Steam is navigating it.
Yeah. It's supposed to make everything much, much, much easier to navigate and do stuff. And people have been demanding this for years. And Steam says they've been working on this for years. So I'm looking forward to it. So if you've stayed away from Steam because of the interface, you're going to get a new interface soon.
Nice. Very, very cool. I'm going to sign up for that immediately after the show. Speaking of after the show, this is the end. If you want more about this, you want links to all the different stuff that Lou and I talked about, then you can find it at thecitadelcafe.com. Music for the show was composed by Kevin MacLeod. You can email us at thecitadelcafe@gmail.com. Find us by name on Twitter and Facebook. Subscribe on iTunes, Android, Stitcher, and Spotify. And of course, share the podcast via word of mouth. It's one of the best ways that you can support the show. It's 100% free. Just poke a friend in the arm and say, hey, this is cool. You should listen to it. My name is Joel Duggan. You can find everything I am doing online, including my illustration and design portfolio at joelduggan.com. If you're interested in hiring me, then just drop me a line there. Sometimes a shout out on social media also works, but really email is my to-do list. Check out my other podcasts about Minecraft at thespawnchunks.com. You can also follow me at Joel Duggan across all social media. And right now I will point you towards Twitch, where I'm doing some extra streaming because it is currently September, where subscriptions on Twitch are half price. So check it out, twitch.tv/Joel Duggan. Lou, where can people find you and all the cool stuff you're doing online?
The easiest place to find me is under the name Busy Zombie Lord, under wherever your social media is, and you check out my show, Zombies Ate My Podcast, where this week you will get a spoiler-filled, detailed rundown of The Dead Don't Die, because both Ryan and I have watched The Dead Don't Die. So I rather than talk Walking Dead this week, I told him, no, go rent Dead Don't Die, because we're going to talk about something different this week, because I'm sick of talking about Walking Dead.
Nice. You've been listening to the Citadel Cafe, where we are fast, easy, and cheap, but you can only pick two.